Okay, hello. We're now moving along into the area of motivation. This is lecture number 23 now. And the way in which we're going to proceed, we're first going to take a look at different theories of motivation, of which there are three. And we'll get into those in just a few moments. And then what I want to do is, as we go along, I want to study some of the major findings in the area of motivation by taking a look at hunger, which psychology has made very important contributions. Then what I want to do is I want to look at the area of aggressive behavior, aggressive motivation, and then the area of sexual motivation. So that's how we will proceed in this particular area of motivation. So I like to start out by talking to students about a model that's been around for a long time to help us to understand motivation. And the model is one that's simply called the SOR model. The S refers to stimulus, O refers to organism, and R refers to response. So the study of motivation really is the study of what's going on here, inside the organism that we can't really see. The relationship between independent variables, those stimuli in the environment that may be influencing us, and the responses that we exhibit, dependent variables. Now up here I have a picture of one of my favorite baseball players. His name is Mookie Betts. He used to play for the Red Sox. Now he's playing for the Los Angeles Dodgers. But I want you to pretend for a few moments that when you saw me today, instead of having this white shirt on that I have on, that I had a complete Boston Red Sox uniform with the hat and the shirt and the socks and baseball spikes and everything. And you could make some assumptions about me. One assumption might be that, instead of being a professor, well, maybe I'm a baseball player. Or maybe what you see is a costume that I was wearing for a party. Maybe, at the time of Halloween party. Or another assumption that you could make about me was that I had really kind of lost it, and I was kind of having some kind of a episode in which I didn't really know who I was, but I put on this uniform. You could make a lot of different assumptions, but the most important thing is that they're all inferences. You're making guesses about me based upon what you see me do. So really, that's the study of motivation. The study of motivation is this, how we go about making inferences about what's going on within an organism based upon the stimuli that are in the environment and the responses that the organism makes. So this is a very interesting area of research, and it's one that has been around for a long time. It's one of the oldest areas of research in the field of psychology. So let's begin this by acknowledging a couple important things regarding motivation. First of all, we can't really say that a behavior is a motivated behavior unless we know that there's intent involved. So that's one of the key characteristics of motivated behavior is intent. For example, and this is I think an easy example that will help us understand it a little bit better. If you were walking along and you had a stack of books in your hand, and someone came along in back of you and knocked those books out of your hand very purposely in order to cause you some harm. That's one situation. Another situation, however, is maybe when you're walking with these books, you're not really looking where you're going, you're looking at something else, and then a person coming the other way, also who is not looking, you slam into each other and your books go flying. There's no intent involved there to do harm to a person. Intent is absolutely crucial in making that determination that a behavior is indeed a motivated behavior. And of course, in a court of law, that becomes very important, intent. Again, unless we know that that behavior involves intent, then we can't really say that that's a motivated behavior. Again, intention is crucial. Some aspects of motivation may be deeply buried in the unconscious. Indeed, this is very much part of Freudian theory, that there may be some things that we don't even recognize that are serving to prompt our behavior. So, those are important things to consider when we are evaluating this whole area of motivation. So again, this, these unconscious kinds of factors, revisiting the iceberg principle, that so much of our personality, our behavior is really a product of what's going on beneath the surface, the unconscious. So intent, and maybe the whole idea that some aspects of motivation really are things that we don't recognize, that they're in the unconscious. So these concepts for understanding motivation are really important, and we need to provide, some more definition here. Motives are anything that prompt our behavior, that initiate our behavior. Drives are urges to engage in action, and we have two basic types of drives. Primary drives, like hunger, for example. Hunger keeps us alive, keeps us healthy. It satisfies our basic biological needs. When we're hungry, we begin to seek out food. That's a primary drive. And then there are learned drives, and there are many different aspects of learned drives. The desire that we have for approval. This helps us to adjust to our social environment. So again, we have primary unlearned drives, and we have learned drives. And we also have incentives. What are incentives? Incentives are things in the environment that stimulate our behavior, and usually incentives are kind of the flip side of a coin. That's the model that I want to try to advance to you to get you to understand. So incentives and drives and incentives are really the flip side of a coin. Hunger is a drive that's causing us to look for food. Food is an incentive that invites us to eat. So again, we view drives and incentives usually as being the flip side of a coin. When we aren't hungry, food ordinarily is not an incentive, but incentives can arouse us to engage in action even without a drive. When you see, for example, a delicious dessert, something that really, really looks good, even though you may be full because you've just had a dinner, that is in and of itself enough to prompt you to engage in more eating behavior. So again, that delicious dessert is serving as an incredible incentive that can arouse this drive state. Just the sight of that delicious dessert is enough. So again, incentives are incredibly important in terms of motivating our behavior. So major defining characteristics of motivated behavior, then certainly arousal. A motive makes you feel more active. It makes you feel restless. Direction, motivated behavior has purpose. There's intent. There's a goal. There's aim. And desire. And again, this is experienced as expectation. It's experienced as tension and strain. So again, these are the major defining characteristics of motivated behavior. There must be arousal, there must be direction, and there must be desire. Okay. Again, let's take a look at some of these primary theories of motivated behavior, and certainly the one that's been around the longest is the one that we call the pleasure-pain theory. That is also what we call hedonism. And what we mean by this, we'll get into in just a few moments, but pleasure-pain theory is simply saying that we're really constantly seeking out pleasure, avoiding pain in our lives. Then there's the reflex-drive theory, which is really a combination of two different theories we'll get into in just a moment. And then lastly, there is instinct theory. What I want to say at the outset before we cover some of the basics of these three different theories is that the pleasure-pain theory, reflex-drive theory, instinct theory, they're the three major theories. There are some other ones that I think have also attracted attention, but certainly these are the three main ones. And they all have problems. Every single one of them has some important things to say, but at the same time, they have problems, each one of them, weaknesses, where they can't really explain all aspects of motivated behavior. So please keep that in mind. So the pleasure-pain theory of motivation, I noted to you, has really been around the longest. We seek pleasure in our lives. We avoid painful situations in our lives. The major problem with this theory is that sometimes we actually seek out painful situations. Sometimes we actually willfully seek out pain. Well, let me give you an example. Joan of Arc, the martyr, Joan of Arc, made the choice, okay, to be burned at a stake. And because she did not want to give up her beliefs. That, according to pleasure-pain theory, shouldn't happen. I think that there are momentary painful things that all of us go through in our lives. I mean, hopefully you're enjoying the lectures and you're enjoying psychology, but there's a chance that some of you aren't, and you're enduring a mildly painful situation maybe, and you're doing it in order to achieve something, and that's some knowledge in the field of psychology, and then ultimately the credits that come along with having passed the course. So again, the pleasure-pain theory certainly helps us to explain some aspects of behavior, but other aspects of our behavior, especially the fact that we don't 100% of the time avoid painful situations, is certainly something that we have to contend with in our consideration of hedonism, the pleasure-pain motivation theory. The reflex-drive theory motivated behavior is yet another important aspect of motivation, one of the major theories, and it's really one that was divided up into two separate theories. There was first the reflex theory, which just said that our behavior is an automatic response to a stimulus. It's like a reflex. It's like when we talked about the patellar reflex, for example, that was a reflex, an automatic response to a stimulus. So the reflex part of the reflex-drive theory is saying that these things, our behaviors, motivated behavior, is simply automatic. The major problem with this part of the reflex-drive theory is that sometimes that stimulus may be present that prompts behavior, but there's no response that occurs. For example, let's say that you're eating a meal and there's a lot of food that's on the table, and you eat the food, some of the food that's there, but there's still more food there. Why is it that you've stopped eating? The correct stimulus is there, but there's no response on your part, and it's because you're full. We know that, but the reflex theory says that as long as that stimulus is there, you should respond to it. There are also situations in our lives where there's no obvious stimulus that we respond to. The behavior that we call curiosity, for example, or an individual explores an environment where there's no explicit stimulus prompting them to do so, is also a problem for this reflex theory. So what psychologists did in this history, really, of the reflex drive theory is they started to include a drive component, meaning that behavior is stimulated by an internal drive stimuli. So, for example, when you're hungry, your stomach starts to rumble, and you get these feelings of weakness, and that those internal biological stimuli then are ones that prompt you to engage in certain behaviors. When we take a look at this theory, the problem with it, of this drive component of the reflex drive theory, is that our behavior, our motivated behavior, can persist even without an internal drive stimulus. So there's been wonderful experiments that have been done, for example, where they've deadened the stimuli, the receptors rather, in the mouth. And the thirsty organism, the theory is that it's those stimuli that are prompting you to engage in your mouth that are prompting you to engage in drinking liquids. Well, if that source of stimulation has been removed by deadening those nerves in that area, then theoretically you should not drink any liquid. But that's clearly not the case. Or in the case, for example, of hunger, where you eliminate, for example, food going into your stomach. Instead of it's exteriorized, the food goes out through a fistula in your throat. In these kinds of situations, typically what happens is an organism continues to eat food and continues to regulate their food intake just fine. So again, the reflex drive theory motivated behavior, there's problems with it. Problems with the reflex part of it, problems with the drive component part of it. Yet a third theory in this area is what we refer to as instinct theory. And this was something that was really developed by European ethologists. It's a branch of biology. They're interested in exploring animal behavior. And two individuals that contributed an enormous amount to this area, in fact, they won the Nobel Prize for their work, Konrad Lorenz and Nico Tinbergen. So when we talk about instinct, we talk about an inborn predisposition to act in a particular way. And many scientists believe that things like mating behavior, aggression, parental behavior, that they're instinctive, they're automatic. There's no learning that's really required at all, that it's inborn, it's there from the time of birth. Konrad Lorenz and Tinbergen really were the ones that revived instinct theory. There was a period of time where in the United States, of course, learning and behaviorism was dominant, and that study really suggested to many that there was, no such thing really as these inborn kinds of predispositions to act in a particular way. And that dominance of the area of learning persisted for a long time until Lorenz and Tinbergen came along in the 50s and 60s. And what they started to do was they started to look at what we call species-specific behaviors, and they looked at the adaptive significance of behavior. And indeed, if you take a look at their wonderful research, that give you a couple of examples of this. They looked at what are called fixed action patterns that are set in motion by very specific releaser stimuli. So here you see a mother gull, and she has this blackish red spot that's on her beak. And when they are feeding their squabs, they'll go out and forage for the day, and when they come back to feed their squabs, what the squabs will do is they'll begin pecking on their beak, on the mother's beak, on that dot that you see there, and that will cause the mother to regurgitate her food and deliver that food to the young squab. So these squabs, these herring gulls, peck on their mother's beak. They cause her to regurgitate the food. They cause the food to be then delivered to them. And again, this is an example of this fixed action pattern. The pecking and the releaser stimuli that prompts this. And indeed, this is what Tinbergen and Conrad Lorenz were studying, these what they consider to be these instinctive kinds of behaviors. Take a look at some of the work also that they conducted, namely Nico Tinbergen studying three-spined stickleback fish. If you take a look at the male, the red belly of the male and this bluish white back, this is what they look like, and that red belly really is a stimulus that prompts males to begin, other males to begin to attack. When another male sees that red belly on that male, then it's an immediate stimulus to engage in this attack behavior. But when a male sees instead a female stickleback fish that has this grayish green body, and their abdomen swells up in this silvery swollen belly, that instead is a stimulus for courtship. So indeed, these are very interesting, very specific kinds of stimuli, releaser stimuli, that are prompting very ritualized kinds of behaviors. And indeed, their work is work that really has prompted us to consider instinct as being a very important aspect of motivation. Instinct theory is wonderful, really, for explaining a lot of lower animal behavior, but it really, when you take a look at complex behaviors that we see in the case of humans, it really doesn't help us to explain those kinds of behaviors. So again, just to summarize these three different theories, the hedonism, the pleasure-pain theory, and then the theory called the Reflex-Drive theory, which is really a combination of two different theories, and then this whole idea of instinct, can explain, each one can explain some aspects of behavior, but certainly can't explain all aspects of behavior. So having looked then at those three different types of motivated behavior, what we'll do is, in our next lecture, we'll get on into the area of the study of hunger, which is a really interesting area of study of motivation, which there's a lot of really great work that's been done, and we'll take a look at that in our next lecture.